The man suddenly froze, staring into the distance. It was as if he sensed a terrifying presence rising from the jungle. The air grew heavy and stifling, an unshakable dread pressing down on everyone. Following the direction his companion pointed, Will caught sight of a faint red glow deep within the forest.
Run!
Without a second's hesitation, the three of them turned and sprinted away. Nina and Katie split up, firing to hold the creature back as long as possible. Will rushed to replace the cable car's battery. Only by restarting the cable car would they have a chance to escape. Watching the red light flicker in the forest, Nina braced herself for battle. But then, eerily, the red light suddenly vanished. It felt as if the creature had withdrawn its killing intent in an instant. The surrounding forest fell into a silence that chilled them to the bone. Yet a deeper fear welled up inside Katie. Nina looked at her in confusion. Meanwhile, Will was still frantically swapping the battery. He could feel some unknown force drawing nearer. A faint rustling of leaves echoed through the woods. Katie sensed danger instantly and fired a grenade launcher into the darkness without hesitation. The blast lit up the entire forest, but a second later a massive shadow slowly emerged from the smoke. The grenade hadn't harmed it at all. With a low roar, the creature charged at them. Nina fired several quick shots, but the bullets had no effect. Seeing this, Katie quickly turned and ran. At that moment, Will finally finished replacing the cable car's battery. He immediately signaled Nina to flip the switch. Nina jumped onto the cable car and successfully caught Will's hand, but the danger wasn't over. Katie was still running for her life. The creature stayed right on her heels. Will fired repeatedly behind him, desperate to slow the monster down. He needed to buy Katie more time to reach the cable car, but the creature seemed to realize they were about to escape. It suddenly hooked its claws onto the steel cable. The cable car rocked violently under the immense force. Thankfully, Will and Nina steadied themselves just in time to avoid falling. By then, Katie had reached the cable car platform, but as she watched the slowly moving car, fear and the instinct to survive battled inside her. As the cable car began to glide away, her will to live finally overpowered her fear. She leapt forward with all her strength, but still fell just short. Fortunately, Will grabbed her in time.
Don't let go!
Oh, I got you, I promise!
The group drew closer and closer to the 8,000-foot safety line. They only needed to cross the white boundary to be safe. But just then, the creature hooked the cable again. The cable car swayed violently, and Katie lost her footing. Moments later, Will and Nina were thrown off as well. Luckily, they weren't far from the ground and landed without injury. Ignoring the pain, they scrambled to their feet and dashed toward the safe zone. Just as they were about to be caught, the three of them stepped into the safe zone at an altitude of 8,000 feet. The creature lingered just beyond the boundary for a moment before retreating. 3 years earlier, these monsters known as Reapers suddenly appeared. They swept across the world like a flood. In barely a month, humanity was nearly wiped out. Countless towns were reduced to desolate ruins, yet they never preyed on animals or seized resources. It was as if their sole purpose was to cleanse the earth of humans. But they never crossed the 8,000-foot safety line. This white boundary became the only shield protecting the survivors. Here, people built crude bases, struggling to keep the last sparks of life alive. Will was one of these survivors. For years, he had lived in the base with his young son, but sadly, his son suffered from severe asthma. As time passed, their medicine supply dwindled. Each of the boys' strained breaths felt like a death knell. It was as if the next moment might take Will's only family away. Determined to protect his last remaining bloodline, Will decided to risk everything to search for medicine at the hospital. But the hospital had long since become a Reaper hunting ground, its danger beyond imagination. Will knew he couldn't face the Reapers alone, so he sought out Nina, a scientist. She was the only one who had ever escaped the Reapers alive, and for years she had devoted herself to studying their weaknesses. She was the best person Will could possibly turn to. Because of this, Nina understood better than anyone how terrifying the Reapers were. She had been working on a special bullet designed to kill them, but with resources scarce inside the safe zone, the materials were hard to find. This mission offered her a rare chance to return to her lab. In the end, Nina agreed to join him. Will also recruited his friend Katie. She had once been a fearless scout. After hearing Will's plan, Katie agreed without a second thought. After bidding his son a heavy farewell, Will set out with Nina and Katie on the dangerous journey. Before leaving, Nina brought along her invention, the Reaper Scale. It was a device designed to detect Reapers. Whenever a creature drew near, its needle would shift. But along the way, Katie kept resenting Nina's arrogance and coldness. Nina, however, couldn't be bothered to argue with her. The tension between them flared up more than once. Will felt helpless but could only lead the two of them forward in silence. The three finally reached the white line at an altitude of 8,000 feet. Crossing it meant stepping into Reaper territory. Yet none of them hesitated. Each moved forward with unshakable resolve. Before long, they came across an abandoned car. Inside, Will discovered an old grenade. Nina, meanwhile, found a fragment of a creature. Just as she was about to study it, Katie impatiently urged them to move on. She even mocked Nina, calling her a burden. Nina responded casually, revealing Katie's secret that she had liked Will for years. The revelation sent Katie over the edge, and the two of them broke into a full fight. Will rushed in to stop them, barely keeping the team from falling apart. After a tense silence, the three pressed on toward the cable car station. But as they reached the area beneath the cable car, Nina's Reaper scale suddenly sounded an alarm. A Reaper was silently closing in. This was when the terrifying scene at the beginning unfolded. After narrowly escaping back to the base, their tense nerves finally began to ease. Katie realized that fighting a Reaper was far harder than she had imagined. A single misstep could cost them their lives. Yet the way they worked together in the face of death brought a subtle warmth to the team. But when everyone else had fallen into deep sleep, Will found himself thinking of his late wife. Perhaps she too had felt helpless when facing the Reapers. But the thought only strengthened his resolve. No matter the cost, he would protect the only family he had left. The next day, the three of them set out once more. This time, they planned to reach the hospital through the mine. Will had once worked as a miner, so he knew these tunnels well. It was a shortcut to the hospital, but they would have to cross a low safety zone in under 45 seconds. Nina grew furious when she learned of this, for Will had never warned them of the danger. But arguing was pointless now. It was Katie's half-joking reassurance that finally eased the tension. The three carefully stepped into the mine. The tunnels were damp and chilling, and even the Reaper scale failed to work here. They could only rely on instinct to sense any movement around them. Then Will suddenly discovered that the path to the hospital was completely blocked. This meant they had to keep descending into areas where Reapers appeared more frequently to find another way out. They continued forward with extreme caution. Each step felt like walking on the edge of an abyss. A single misstep could mean death in the endless darkness. At that moment, Nina suddenly heard a faint sound. Will quickly signaled them to cover their headlamps. A red light suddenly flickered from deep within the tunnel. They had been spotted by a Reaper. They immediately turned and ran, but the Reaper's heavy footsteps drew closer and closer behind them. Ordinary bullets couldn't harm it, leaving them no choice but to flee. Then they suddenly spotted a narrow crevice and scrambled inside. They switched off their lamps and held their breath. They had to avoid letting their breath give them away. The red glow slowly crept into the crevice. The Reaper was probing for any sign of life. Just as they were about to run out of breath, Will quickly tossed a flare to the side. The sudden burst of light drew the Reaper away, giving them a brief moment of relief. In the flare's glow, Katie spotted a blocked exit. The three quickly cleared the debris and climbed out, but none of them expected another Reaper was waiting on the other side. Katie, who climbed out first, froze in shock. Its tail struck her in an instant. She was dragged into the darkness. Before the others could even grieve for their friend, another Reaper's footsteps were already approaching. In a panic, Nina spotted a ladder. The two of them, exhausted, scrambled upward and finally burst out of the mine. Light awaited them at the top, but Katie's death weighed on their hearts like a heavy stone. Yet they could not stop. They had to carry their grief and keep moving forward. Fortunately, not far away stood an abandoned car and a dilapidated hut. They provided a brief chance to rest. Inside, all was deathly silent, and both still mourned Katie's loss. Nina had never truly hated Katie and had even hoped to make peace with her, but she never imagined she would lose that chance forever. Will, meanwhile, sank into deep guilt, believing he was to blame for Katie's death, but Nina urged him to turn his grief into anger. She said vengeance fueled by rage was far more meaningful than silent sorrow. Her words cut like a blade, pulling Will back from the edge of despair. A spark of hope lit up in his eyes once again. Early the next morning, the two drove across the safety line once again. The once crowded town had long been overtaken by animals. The ruined hospital stood like a forgotten tomb. At last, intruders arrived to explore it. The two hurried through the hospital searching for medicine. Every extra second here meant greater danger. Finally, among the dust-covered supplies, Will found the medicine he needed. At that moment, Nina's Reaper scale gave a warning. They had to leave fast. As they packed the medicine and prepared to retreat, sharp tentacles suddenly shot out from the wall. Will dodged desperately in the narrow passage and finally escaped with Nina. Just when they thought they were safe, tentacles burst through the wall again, pinning Will tightly against it. Nina spotted a fire axe nearby, grabbed it and swung hard at the Reaper. She finally freed Will. The two rushed into a wide open hall. Will stared at the corridor ahead, not daring to relax for a second. Then he noticed an oxygen tank nearby and suddenly had an idea. He told Nina to leave first, then hid behind the counter, ready to face the Reaper alone. Will waited for the moment the Reaper appeared, then shifted his aim toward the oxygen tank. The violent explosion blasted the Reaper away. At last, they were safe. Will felt the place was far too dangerous and wanted to return to the base quickly with the medicine for his son. But Nina suggested going to the old lab instead. She believed humanity couldn't hide in the safe zone forever.
We can't live like this forever. Sooner or later, we have to fight them.
Will was persuaded, and they quickly drove to the lab, but they didn't know that the Reaper lying on the ground had started to move again. After arriving at the lab, Nina immediately took out the solution to begin her experiment. She carefully picked up a bullet with tweezers and coated it with the liquid. She loaded the bullet into the gun and aimed it at a piece of Reaper skin. But unfortunately, it still didn't work. Stubborn Nina refused to give up. She was determined to create a bullet that could pierce a Reaper's defenses. So Nina told Will to head back first, because he had to deliver the medicine to his son as soon as possible. If she succeeded, they would meet again at the base. Persuaded by Nina, Will finally drove away. Nina resumed her experiments. Repeated failures didn't break her, they only strengthened her resolve. But then the Reaper scale suddenly began to spin. Nina realized a Reaper was approaching, but she couldn't give up yet. Her eyes landed on a battery on the wall, and a new idea struck her. She quickly coated another bullet and repeated the process. With a do-or-die resolve, Nina fired a shot at the Reaper at the final moment. Meanwhile, Will was speeding back to the base. But disaster struck. An exploding tire sent Will off balance in an instant. The vehicle flipped onto its side. When Will regained consciousness, he kicked open the windshield. Before he could fully recover, a distant roar reached his ears.
Shit.
Will grabbed the medicine and his weapon, racing toward the mountain base. At the same time, a reaper was closing in. Will ran for his life, for he carried not only his own life, but also his son's chance to survive. As a father, he had to give everything he had. Though the reaper was fast, Will could already see the safe zone ahead, but then he suddenly spotted another reaper near the safe zone. This left Will trapped in a desperate dilemma, but he refused to die so easily. He grabbed his weapon and fought back with all his strength. He knew bullets were useless against the reapers, but it was his last act of defiance. Just as Will was about to be overwhelmed, a gunshot suddenly rang out from behind the reaper. The creature exploded into a cloud of black smoke before his eyes. Will stared in disbelief. Nina had truly succeeded. With a few more shots, she easily took down the remaining reapers. Seeing this, Will finally relaxed. But then Will noticed the fragments left behind were all mechanical parts. Clearly, these creatures weren't born naturally. They were manufactured killing machines. It turned out their inability to eat, sleep, or cross 8,000 feet was all part of their programming. It was all encoded behavior, but no one knew who had created them, and only the scattered wreckage remained. But now, they finally had a way to kill the Reapers. The rising sun seemed to herald the arrival of hope. Will was finally reunited with his son, and they embraced tightly. Watching them, Nina finally smiled. It was time for humanity to rise up. Nina raised the pirate flag of rebellion with her own hands. Other survivors followed her lead. People began mass-producing special bullets. Nina and Will would sometimes offer special bullets to Katie's memory. It was as if they were sharing that hope with her. The wind in the Rocky Mountains remained icy, but dawn had already broken through the night. People stepped bravely into the depths of the forest. On this perilous highland, hope was quietly taking root.